There you are now. Welcome back to the workshop. So today's video, guys, is going to be just you following me along as I strip out this engine. So any of you that were along for the live feed, thank you very much for coming to the live feed. It was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Something a little bit different, and you got a chance to see our new Landy. God, all I want to do is go and work on the Landy now, but I suppose jobs have to get done and race season is fast approaching, so we need to get our cars ready for that. This engine is actually pretty fresh. It only went in the car, but it is showing a problem. We're struggling to get oil pressure up, and rather than starting it up and seeing if oil pressure will come, we tried backfilling the pump. We cranked it over a little bit on the starter motor, and it was reluctant to build oil pressure. So I want to whip the motor out and take off the clutch and drop gear housing and just check the oil pump to make sure that something hasn't gone awry there. I have a sense in my mind that something isn't right there, and something has broken or something has gone astray. So I thought I'd just bring you along on today's video with me as I strip out the motor. Probably not one of my more exciting videos, but you know, this is something that's gonna start happening in as you follow me through the shop. We will repeat stuff a little bit, and you'll be just following along and seeing what it is that I do. Hopefully you will enjoy that. So taking an engine out of a race car is not much different to taking an engine out of a road going car. It just tends to be a little bit easier, as you've remembered from when we took the engine out of the 1275 GT. Things are kind of more designed to be taken in and out. So we start off and we'll take off the inlet. So like you'll remember before, when we were putting the engine into the race car, I do this in an order, and it's basically the reverse order when it comes to taking the engine out. It's basically the other way around. On this one, the rad and fan and all that can stay together. We don't need to remove any of that to get the engine in or out, which is great. We can keep it dressed. We will pop the dizzy out just to give ourselves a bit of room to get the engine forward. We'll take the inlet and the exhaust off. We'll obviously take the breathers off, disconnect the clutch from the clutch housing here. And because this is a Cooper S, it has a remote gear housing. So we'll have to take the remote gear housing off, and the engine steadies from underneath. So we'll try and get you some angles of that as we take the engine steadies off and remove that. First thing first, as always, when we're either putting an engine in or taking it out, is get the car jacked up and onto axle stands, and then you can join me back again as we take off the carburetors. I have the car jacked up now, and I'm starting to make my way to taking off this manifold. So you can see I've taken off the fuel line. In this car we have braided fuel line with AN fittings, just to make it again quick and easy. I often get questions about those AN fittings. Do I think they're good, or do I think they're useful? Or braided hose, can you put braided hose throughout the car? So I'm telling you now, if you are going to use braided hose throughout the car, it works very well, and I do think braided hose in the car is safer in most cases. But what I will say to you is make sure you use bulkhead fittings and air equipped fittings like these. So that's the bulkhead fitting that we use, and these are to be used at any major intersection with the car. You might wonder why I think it's so important. One, for safety, but two, if you just have a braided hose running from the fuel tank up to the car, let's just say you put your fuel pump in the boot and you run a braided hose from the fuel pump all the way through the car, through grommets and up to the carburetors. A thing that can happen, and I've seen this happen lots and lots of times before. See, for example, where we have here, we have no fitting at all. We just have the end of the hose and it's held with a jubilee clip. This is fine, but what can happen is fuel can permeate at that joint. It can permeate out of the joint, and it goes between the braided metal of the hose and the rubber, and you'll get this permanent fuel smell inside the car. You get this smell of fuel inside the car. If you use bulkhead fittings between the bulkhead of the boot, and then you use a bulkhead up here at the firewall at the front, and then make your connections in your engine bay and make your connections in the boot. If you get any permeation of fuel between the inner part of the hose, the rubber inner lining, and the braided outer covering, you won't get a smell coming all the way through. If you've got one line between the front of the car and the back, any oils or greases or fuel that gets onto the hose has a clear path all the way back through the car to the boot. And over weeks and months, that permeation happens and you get this fuel building up. Remember, the braid is only a protection, it's not actually sealed. So fuel can actually come out through the braid. So if it gets between the hose and the fuel line, you get this kind of smell of fuel inside in the car, and it's not a nice thing to have. And you get this sort of car just smelling like fuel all the time, and it's very unpleasant. So the best way to do it is, yes, I do think braided lines are good throughout the car, but if you are going to use braided lines throughout the car, the best way to do it is using air-equipped fittings and bulkheads, and that'll get you where you are. So I'm going to get the nuts off the carburetor. So where the carburetors mount onto the cylinder head, as you all know, it's always a really tight spot. On these H4s, which are FIA spec H4s, accessing the bolts is pretty tricky. There's not a lot of room. I'll show you what I use. I use a combination of my very dandy little Facom wrench, a long reach 1/2 inch socket, and a wobble drive. I'll show you that setup now in a second. Get you a nice close up of it. So that's the ratchet setup I use. Deep socket with a 4-inch extension and my handy dandy little ratchet. What that means is you can get a hand in around this side and you can get the ratchet on to the nut that's way in there at the back. Getting the nut cracked open is a little bit of a pain. You've kind of to just you don't have a lot of room to move, but once you sort of get it going, you can just turn the end of the ratchet now and you get the nut comes off nice and handy. So is it worth, people often ask me, is it worth tooling up for specific jobs? I am a big believer in having specific tools for specific jobs. Somebody asked me recently, actually, in the comments of one of the videos, would I do some content on tools that I'd made for doing specific jobs on minis, and I will actually try and do that soon. I will actually try and get a video together that shows some of the special tools I have. I use them so often now, I actually find it hard to even know what is a special tool and what isn't one, because I have them so often. We're in a situation now where we can just slide these carbs off. These are doweled onto the manifold, and once I pop them off here, I'll show you where the dowel is on the manifold. So they're just a little tight here, and that is because they're sitting on the dowel. So just a little bit of wiggling just to get them to pop off the dowel, and then they should just come straight up. There they go. Okay. So I'll give you another angle of this and you can see the dowels. So these are the dowels, okay? See them just in here. So that's the studs that hold on the manifold, and then the dowel is this little roll pin. There's one on each manifold, on each port, and it corresponds with dowel holes that are in the manifold. So if you see here on the manifold, there's one of the dowel holes and there's the other. What you can see here is work that we did. So I welded up all the base of the manifold here to give me these little ears, and that allows me then to make sure I can easily mount on the manifold, so I'm not relying on the nuts to actually center the manifold on the cylinder head. It's centering on those dowels. That gives the inlet manifold a better register, and it also means that if there's any vibration, the manifold doesn't lean one side or the other, which then could move the port out of reference with the passageway in the cylinder head and the passageway in the manifold. It keeps everything in register, keeps everything square. Something that's well worth doing on twin SU manifolds. Doesn't matter whether it's for fast road, high performance race. I always dowel those manifolds to the cylinder head, because otherwise you're relying on the reference of the head studs. And to be honest with you, that as a reference point is never good. They can be up and down even as far as 2 or 3 millimeters in some cylinder heads. So it really is worthwhile doing it if you are building a cylinder head at, you know, you've the head off and you can actually get out to drill the holes. Okay, next on this list is going to be to release the engine stabilizer and the clutch. I always remove, when I'm taking an engine out, I always take the clutch out, clutch slave cylinder off the gearbox. To be honest with you, it saves having to re-bleed the clutch every time when you're putting the engine in. And it's, you know, with these stainless steel fasteners, it's a cinch. It's really easy. They spin in the housing real handy, and it just saves a bit of time. What I do then, because it's on this braided flexible line, is I just post it in down the back of the engine there, and it sits in on the subframe out of the way. And while it's in there, it won't get in the way when you're lifting out the engine, and it waits there for the next time. Next is just to get off some of the ancillaries. So just nice and handy to take the distributor cap and leads off in one unit, and you can put them to one side. And then the same then with the rotor arm. Always a good idea to take the rotor arm so that it doesn't get knocked or damaged when you're lifting out the engine. Disconnect the power to that, and then that's the power to there. Okay. Next to come out is the distributor. Now, generally speaking, the way I deal with distributor is to figure out where my Allen key is gone. Ah, there it is. Sorry, not the distributor, the coil. So rather than taking all the wires off the coil, because I have to take this bolt anyway, because that's holding the earth, I just take the 2 bolts out that are holding the coil. The coil's on a slot, so you don't even have to take the bolts out, you just have to loosen them. And then you're able to just pop the coil out then from where it is. Again, I have these all on Allen key fasteners because that just gives you the handiness of you know, being able to easily take things apart and not getting caught up with loads of trying to get in there with box spanners and all that sort of stuff. So in the case of this job, I often put bolts just back where they came from, just loosely just tie them in. And it just gives you an idea where things are or where things should be. I'm going to get a bit of paper towel now to wrap the coil up so it doesn't scratch the body. Okay, so I just wrapped the coil up in a bit of paper towel, and then just with a bit of cheap PVA tape just around there. It might seem like a bit of an unusual practice, but it's actually good to get used to doing that with race engines where you want to take things apart and be easily and quickly able to get them back together. Keeping this like this keeps the wires together on the coil, so I know what way the connections are, keeps the bracket with the coil, and keeps it tidy and with the car. So when I want to put this back on, just whip the tape off, back on with the 2 bolts. It's about getting used to being speedy at taking things apart, as well as finding where your problems are and keeping ahead of them. Next to come off now is going to be that oil bracket. We actually had a little bit of trouble with this before, leaking oil. Actually, I think that's 9/16. We had a little problem, as I said, with this leaking oil, and I'll show you where and why. It's all down to how that copper washer sits around the top of the banjo. It needs to be very tight fitting. There's 2 different sizes of copper washer. One is a copper washer to sit down against that flange there, and you can see there's a little bit of play. But if I bring that up on to the treads, you can see there's loads of play in there. And the surface this has to sit against on the T into the oil pressure gallery has no real big surface area. So you need a copper washer that just fits really tight onto the treads. You can see that one's there. We actually got a smaller size and filed it out. Richie was helping me and he filed it out until it just barely fitted on there. So it's important if you're coming up against putting a banjo type oil fitting in there that you get that. We came across it and it caused us a bit of messing here the other day trying to get it to seal when we were working on trying to get oil pressure up. So I always pop the distributor out because it's very easy to bump the distributor while you're taking an engine in or out, and if you bump the distributor while you're taking the engine in or out, you can bend the quill shaft of the distributor, and it's a very small piece of steel. It's just over a touch over 6 millimeters. So you get a running out. In an FIA car like this that's using points, it's very important that the distributor is very much true and in line. So just worthwhile to do, to take it out, and just protects it. It also gives us access then down here to the battery cable, which is on the starter motor. This car has a master key, and it's always a good idea just to check, make sure the master key is off before you go taking the live battery cable off, because otherwise you can get a situation where the battery cable touches off the body and you're in big trouble then. So this has a high torque starter motor, one of those Bry's high torque starter motors. So we have on here 2 connections, well 3 really. We have the 2 lives, the main live for the loom, we have the starter motor live, and we have the alternator live, which is this guy here. So that's the alternator live. Then we've got the main live for the loom, and then this one here, which is just for the transponder. That's just live for the transponder. And again, we'll move those cables out of the way. That one can stay there, it goes onto the starter motor, and that one can go out of the way. It's the transponder and the battery cable. Next now is to take off the oil cooler connections, and in our case the easiest place to get those oil cooler connections is just here at the front. So we can just take our 2 oil cooler connections off, one here. We're going to be popping our oil cooler out of the way anyway to give ourselves a bit more room, and we're taking the engine out. And then this one here, which is the feed from the oil pump into the engine, and again that. I use a shifter on these because they're never really very tight, and it's just nice and handy, and it saves kind of marring up the black anodize that's on those cooler connections. Okay, put our 2 cooler pipes up there. Again, just keeping them out of the way, tuck in there behind the back of the alternator. Now we've got 2 little screws to take out here, and then our oil cooler will come off out of our way, and we will be ready then to do our disconnections underneath. So this has a remote housing. Now I've spared you the time of watching me take all of the bolts out of the remote housing, so this is just the last one coming out here. The remote housing in some ways is good, it stabilizes the engine, but in other ways it does make taking these engines out a little bit of a pain. So the remote housing has a fork that goes up there and gets into the gear lever, but this whole part of the differential has to stay on the engine, which means as you're taking the engine out you have to kind of tilt it and twist it a bit. I have the drive shafts loose here as well, so with the drive shafts out and the remote off, all we have to do now is work the exhaust loose at the top, and then the 4 engine mounting bolts on the subframe, and then this baby is ready to come out. So I'm just going to pop the alternator out, and I just do this to give myself just another very small bit more room. It doesn't, it nearly is the same size as the rad, so it doesn't actually save you a huge amount of room, but every little bit you can save yourself when it comes to one of these remote engines is worthwhile, because of the remote being in there. You have so little room to move the engine. Getting that extra little bit of space can really help. So now we'll get our engine lifting bracket on, we'll get the engine crane into place, and then we can slowly and gently lift this motor out of the car. So I have the engine crane on, and it's connected up to my engine crane hook, and the main thing here is just to take the engine up nice and slowly. I have the end of the wok, there's the clutch throw out nut, I have some protection on it. That protection there just means that as it's sliding up, it can easily come up and not damage or scrape the wing, because we will keep the engine tight over that side all the time, because we have the rad on this side. So basically just bring it up a little bit and then kind of hoosh it back the way. So kind of using the crane to kind of just bring the engine back towards us. And then it's just a case of continually doing that. Now at the moment it'll be tight because it's just sitting on the drive shafts, but as soon as it comes free of the drive shafts, it'll be a case that I'll be able to tilt it and move it forward as I go. Okay, that's our engine out now. In the next episode, we will strip off the wok, we'll strip off the drop gear housing, and we'll take off the oil pump, and I'll show you how we test the pickup from the engine to the oil pump. We'll test the oil pump, and then we'll be able to ascertain why it is we didn't get oil pressure. We're then going to test the engine for oil pressure out of the car, make sure we get oil pressure up on the starter motor. When we have oil pressure in the engine, then we'll be able to put it back in and get it running. I hope you enjoyed the episode just coming along. I want to take you along with me during the shop, so you see kind of what the day-to-day routine of the shop is, as well as some of the more how-to stuff like we have been doing in the past. Let me know what you think of this style of video, just bringing you along with me. If it's something that you enjoy, I'll do more of this, just routine work that we do in the shop, kind of vlog style. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you want to just stick with the how-to-y stuff, then let me know that in the comments as well, and we can kind of lean more towards that than the kind of vlog style stuff. Let me know what you think, and to anybody who is new to the channel, you are absolutely most welcome. Take a look around. We have loads of content already up there with loads and loads of mini stuff, so have a look, and if you like what you see, maybe subscribe to the channel. We really do appreciate everybody who subscribes. To all my commenters, thank you very much. I love reading your comments, and keep them coming. Anybody who's watching the video who is a subscriber or is not, and you enjoy what you see, hit the old thumbs up. It really does help us and gets the videos noticed for more people to see. Other than that, I'll see you on the next one when we find out what's wrong with this one.